right. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you. It's so good to be here with you today. My name is Denise Martinez. I'm a descendant of Kanuku people. I just recently got my PhD from UC Davis, and I'm now a research administrator there. And today, let's see which computer's talking to me. Today we'll be talking about place-based learning and cultural fire practice in California. Before I dive in though, I will warn you, it's quite a trip here. Didn't quite figure out how to pay for parking. So my little brother at some point will sneak in and grab my keys. And he's being a hero and no one's doing my things. So just to let you know what's going on. Okay. So today we'll start with a background on cultural burning and just how I've been taught to think about it and kind of what I've come to understand about it in my time. And then we'll talk about some of the cultural impacts of fire suppression and why the work that tribes are doing to bring back fire to the ground is so important. Hi, thank you. Thank you. Little brothers are the best. And last, we'll talk about a collaboration at UC Davis that we call Keepers of the Flame. And I'll tell you all about it and so how it's led to some of our current work. So, to start with maybe basic but very complicated question is, what is cultural fire? So I always kind of hem and haw when people ask me to define this very specifically because it is a very broad term applied to very specific practices in different places throughout the state and honestly throughout the world. And so this is how I've come to define it, and it's kind of wordy, and I think that's just how it is for me right now. So it's the intentional use of fire led by Indigenous communities to meet cultural objectives. So you might be wondering, what is a cultural objective? Well, cultural objectives can be very tied to ecology, such as improving browse for elk and deer. It could be more about materials culture. It could be about increasing basketry materials for basket weavers. It could be just teaching an intergenerational group of people how to burn. And that's also a cultural objective of cultural fire. And it could be all of those things at once, right? So those are just some examples so you can kind of wrap your head around what a cultural objective might be. It's a dynamic system of land stewardship that is intertwined with values and ethics and nourished by lifelong experiences of practitioners. So when we're out on burns, there's always kind of a value and an ethic that's driving burns. So if you think about agency, it's a lot about efficiency, it's about fuel reduction, it's about science, evidence-based, hopefully. And on the other hand, with tribes, they might value those things too, but there's also a lot more complex systems of values and ethics that really relate to their cultural practice. And so you might hear things like relationality, being in relationship with the species around them. You might hear folks talk about intergenerational knowledge exchange and how important that is. You might hear about intercultural or intertribal exchange being a value for people and just learning from their neighbors and collaborating with their neighbors on how to steward specific landscapes. Cultural fire is also embedded in cultural institutions and social processes, without which the knowledge loses meaning. So what I mean by that is that traditional knowledge, Indigenous science, whatever word you'd like to use for it, is very embedded in different cultural practices, in different ideas of how the world works, pedagogies, and the way that I've been taught about this knowledge is very much not like the Western way of thinking. If I came, for example, if I went to a lecture on cell biology in a Western university, it would be expected that I then leave that space and that I, am able to repeat that knowledge exactly as it is, exactly as it was told to me. In with the indigenous people I've worked with, which are Norfolk Mono, Kaduk, it's a lot more context-based. So that context is super specific. Not everyone can share certain things. So there's a lot of protocol, for example, around sharing stories and songs. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with knowledge. So now that I know certain things, now I have a responsibility to take care of those things. And so all of this to say that it's a little bit more complex, which makes it really fraught with potential tension and like a lot of conflict to just like take knowledge and put it somewhere else without acknowledging, without collaborating with the people who gave you that knowledge. So practices also shift and diversify as practitioners reapply and adapt their local knowledge over time. So the cultural fire knowledge changes. And I think that's also one of the very important reasons why we advocate for cultural fire practitioners to be able to continue their work, because it's an important part of knowledge sovereignty and knowledge creation to be able to adapt and change over time. And that becomes very difficult if those practices are prohibited or limited in some way. So that was a very lengthy answer to that question, but that's my answer. And so fire in California is incredibly important, and some Native people have even gone so far to say as that their cultures can be fire dependent. And cultural fire practitioners throughout the state have really used fire to do a lot of different things, and some of these are examples. For example, reducing pests in acorn, which is a key basketry or a key food staple. So when you think about, yes, there's an ecological reason, there's also a cultural reason. Same with the stimulation and regeneration of native plants. So there's an ecological reason, there's a taking care of the ecosystem reason, and then there's also a cultural reason. And reducing invasive species, increasing water use efficiency. One of my mentors, Ron Good, really emphasizes that that fire and water are related, and that we should think about how they're affecting each other. And then there's a huge responsibility to other species. So fire creates habitat for wildlife, and again, with improving the quality of basketry material and just regenerating those plants. So there's a responsibility and a relationship with these species, both plant and animal. And so this is maybe small, but we were, through our project, which I'll tell you about later, we were able to talk to practitioners about what they thought of as characteristics for cultural burning. And so they said some of the things I've said already, but also in like a different way. So we have a focus on renewal and health of cultural species and resources. We have attention to relationships between species and a sense of obligation to support the broader ecology. Again, practices vary across tribes. Practitioners return to the site many times. So there's a relationship to place that's really important there. Intergenerational learning and a familial focus. So often when I'm on cultural burns, I see a lot of children. I see, a lot of women, pregnant women, a lot of elders that maybe would have been excluded in kind of a more patriarchal view of fire through agencies. There's also a lot of health benefits to being on the land, and people will emphasize just the exercise involved in being out. And of course, the access to first foods. There's also a sense of nurturing, of a sense of place and a connection to ancestors. There's a connection to language, place names, stories. And so there's a lot here, and you can read more about it. That QR code will take you to our paper. But really, I just thought it was a really beautiful way to describe all of the ways that cultural burning is just really important for communities. And so I wanted to emphasize the relationality piece, because I think it's something that can, in some ways, lead to the sense of place when cultural fire is happening, and it can also be a source of grief when cultural fire can't happen, is that a lot of my mentors express having a sense of responsibility and how fire kind of helps them engage in these relationships with other species. And when fire can't happen, Indigenous people can't rise up to that responsibility. And so there's a lot of tension around that. And also, I think that there's a lot of sense of responsibility to species, to place, that is very important for people as they're planning their burns. And so that QR code will take you to another paper where I kind of nerd out about this with looking at different wildlife programs from tribes and just seeing how different the framing is around these other species, and how that's really helpful for thinking about wildlife restoration and stewardship of these different species. And I'll have them at the end. So I think maybe many of you are familiar with fire suppression as something that we've now come to find is actually very harmful. So fire suppression is, a policy from the early 19th century that prohibited fire. And what this meant was that over time, fuels accumulated in forests because those fires weren't allowed to go through. And I think we can see that that's maybe was a bad science decision, but what I think is important for us to recognize is that it was also an incredibly violent decision. This fire suppression led to cultural suppression because no cultural fires were allowed. It led to a lot of direct violence. So there's records of Native people being shot on sight by district rangers and other agency staff, and how heavily criminalized that practice was. There's also been arrests for arson of Indigenous people doing what they have always done. And there's also a lot of cultures or a lot of instances where Indigenous people push back, right? And they've been speaking up about how fire suppression is not a good idea. So we can see that direct violence. There's also, I think, what environmental justice scholars call slow violence, which is this idea that violence that kind of creates risk for community over time. And so with fire suppression, we see that in the fact that this buildup of fuels made it hard for culturally important native plants to flourish, which was really important for Indigenous foods, Indigenous ceremony, Indigenous practice of culture, and I think that's an injustice. I think it also led to bigger wildfires, which is an injustice for all of us, but a lot of Indigenous communities knowing how to steward and yet still being put in extreme danger from wildfire. That's another kind of slow violence that came out of fire suppression. Take a sip of water. And so to think a little bit more about the cultural impacts of fire suppression, we've talked about losing access to traditional foods and fiber. Also losing access to cultural and ceremonial stewardship. So there were ceremonies rely on fire in a couple ways. Some of them involve burning, and others might require a lot of material that requires burning. And so not having cultural fire is kind of an infringement on cultural ceremony. Again, going back to relationality, concentricity, thinking about these cultural institutions that really had these value and ethic of taking care of other species and how people have that responsibility. And then to not be able to practice that can be really painful for people. There's a lot of language impact. So you think about not being able to practice a specific cultural practice, you might lose words that were associated with that practice because you're just not out on the land doing those things, speaking your language. I think that there's also a restructuring of a cultural identity. So people might have lineages of cultural burners, lineages of basket weavers in their family, and yet they, in this time, because they might not have access to either cultural burning or basket materials, they have to find a different way to do those things, or they have to find a different way to be a cultural burner without cultural burning. And what that has looked like, I think a lot of people have done it really beautifully. A lot of people have become cultural fire advocates. They've become people who are in these meetings with agencies and really trying to advocate for the use of cultural fire. And they've done it beautifully and gracefully. And I think they shouldn't have had to do it, right? Like there's a certain restructuring that happened, and I don't think that's fair. I think fire suppression, thinking about the history of fire suppression, the direct violence, the way that Indigenous people were ignored, the kind of the ways that science and agencies insulted Indigenous knowledge in the science they were putting out, in the way that they were managing, and seeing those practices and that language still today on fires or in collaborations, like that can just be painful to know all that history from your ancestors and family and be confronted with it every day. And so just that extension of colonial ideology is also, I think, an impact for people as they navigate bringing fire back on the ground. And so some of the challenges, I mean, I'll go through these fast, it's kind of a wordy slide, but I think the biggest, maybe obvious one is Indigenous land tenure. So land was stolen, and so Indigenous people lost access to sovereign decision making in a lot of ways on a lot of land. And not only that, but the treaties that were negotiated were not honored in California. And many tribes have to work with public land agencies that have jurisdiction, right? And so that can be just a challenge, and it's an extra added step. It's also a huge injustice for people. And which leads us then to policy. And so because we're relying on collaborations with public agencies, and a lot of times there's rules surrounding jurisdiction, liability, and worker qualifications that can just add added barriers for tribes trying to do work on the land. And many of these policies are kind of inflexible, unlike Indigenous stewardship. So Indigenous stewardship is really responsive because it's place-based, and when we think about agency policy, it's done at a larger scale and way less flexible. I think decision-making can be also be hard because we're looking at collaborations with people who may or may not completely respect Indigenous sovereignty. And even when they really do, and there's good collaborations, bureaucracy can still be really hard to navigate. Again, it goes back to policies being a little inflexible. And I know that there's a lot of really good collaborations out there making it work, going through loopholes or changing policy, but all of those things take a lot of time, which can be really frustrating. And the last one is public perception. So I think this is getting better. Maybe it's just who I surround myself with, I don't know. But I think, there is a collective trauma that we hold about wildfire in the state. And it can be really hard to convince people that intentionally burning is safe. And I think that education is ongoing. And I think that it can be a real detriment, especially when working with agencies that are very, one, they serve the public, and two, there's, a lot of cautiousness. So just, public perception is important. And so that's something that y'all can work on. All right. And I mean, thankfully, it's, it's not all doom and gloom. So, and my advisor, Beth Middleton, made me create this slide after the last one, because I was like, she's like, dang, that's really doom and gloom. There's some hope. And I was like, you're right. So there's just a lot of emerging state policy that's really awesome, a lot of recognition of Indigenous practices and how important they are for the state in, executive orders, in different action plans from agencies. Most recently, a couple state policies that really made a difference for liability and recognition of cultural fire practitioners as experts. There's also a lot of great leadership in fire coming from Indigenous communities, lots of nonprofits and Indigenous-led organizations, the Cultural Fire Management Council, Indigenous Peoples Burning Network. There's Indigenous treks, like the most recent one, the Keduk Women's Treks, where folks can go out and learn from Keduk women, and it's led by Keduk women about fire, and they can get, their qualifications, and they can go on burns. So all of this is super awesome, and there's a lot that that is not on the slide that's also very awesome. And so I think one of the great things is that there's just more partnerships, there's more workshops, there's more learning opportunities, both for academics interested in this, which, there's a postdoc fellow, there's increased intertribal collaboration with agencies and universities, but also for community members themselves, there's more opportunities for them to go to, for example, fire workshops or treks to learn how to bring fire back to their own communities. And I think that's really inspiring. And so these are some of the people that I've learned from, and I've gotten the honor of working with: the Cultural Fire Management Council, the Keduk Tribe, the Tribal Eco Restoration Alliance, the Climate Science Alliance, and then my three main mentors, Ron Good, Diana Almendarez in the middle, and then Julie Tex on the right. And so these are the people that have taught me, but there's just so much cultural fire work happening throughout the state, and a lot of people doing really great work and really leading the movement for the return of fire. Okay, well, the audio resolved itself, so I'm glad. Okay, so now moving to Keepers of the Flame. So this is a collaboration between UC Davis and Ron Good, chairman of the North Fork Mono Tribe, and Diana Almendarez, who is Wintun and is based in Woodland. And so this collaboration has three major pillars. The first is a course for undergrad and graduate students, where we meet twice a week, and we bring guest speakers every week for many Indigenous nations in California, Oregon, and Canada. And that just so happens like where our connections are. We're always open to different folks. And then we have, through that class, we have a final project where students respond to a community need. And this community need could be, amplifying their work, or it could be creating more information about community-based research. And so they make podcasts and videos that kind of respond to these needs, and sometimes get to work with practitioners who are interested in their project directly. And so then we have cultural fire workshops. And so these workshops happen in Mariposa, California, which is kind of near Yosemite, and in Woodland, California, which is near Davis. And here we bring people out. So Diana and Ron lead the workshop. They decide who gets invited. Ultimately, it's our class, and then usually community members. And then we've had tribal fire departments, we've had nonprofits, we've had agencies, we've had like policy folks come out, different universities and funders. And so it's kind of a diverse group with different levels of experience with fire, but everyone gets put to work. So there's that. So then the third pillar is community-based research. So I don't know. I feel like they kind of started looking at us and they're like, hey, you guys are researchers. Would you know the answer to these questions? And so we work with them to identify research questions. I think another important part of this is that it's a really great avenue for student research, both undergraduate and graduate. At the undergraduate level, there's places where undergraduates can plug into current projects. At the graduate level, it's just a really great way to build relationships with potential partners. And so there's, a huge part of the class is teaching ethical engagement. But again, going back to the research, we've also had a couple publications that are co-authored with workshop leaders. And so the paper from earlier, that was co-authored by Ron and Diana. And so when Ron and Diana are interested in publishing with us, we publish with them. And sometimes they're like, I don't have the time. I'm like, that's okay. So there's a balance, right? But that is a part of it. And so we don't have to go through this whole thing, but essentially the goals of this class are to describe the role of fire in Native California culture, to compare and contrast land stewardship ethics from Native American groups to Anglo-American perspectives, describe the basic policy context for culture burning, explore together how to build reciprocal and collaborative cross-cultural relationships, formulate a personal relationship to fire as an essential living element to help its ecosystems, and explore Indigenous climate and environmental justice as it pertains to environmental stewardship. So we have 10 weeks. This is very ambitious. And I think the reason that we're able to do it is that community is such a huge part of the class. They're coming into lectures. They're seeing our students at workshops. They're sometimes Zooming or calling our students to talk about their projects. And that's the only reason why we're able to do these really ambitious things, because it's such a rich experience. I also think that for a lot of our students, they see it as a first step, right? So this is maybe, some of them are Native American Studies students, and some of them come from completely different disciplines where this is maybe the first class they're exposed to these concepts. And so a lot of them see it as a first step. And I think that humility and that ability to see like, wow, this is a really rich topic and experience. Really, the only reason we're able to give them that perspective is because we get to do a lot of hands-on work. Okay, so these are some student quotes. We survey them every year to hear about their experiences. And so, the first one says, I had no idea how this class would play out. Many students are surprised we actually let them burn stuff. So that might be something to do with it. But, my ideas of everything have changed and I'm now motivated to study more. And then the next person says, before this class, I didn't really understand the big difference between cultural fire and prescribed fire. After taking this course, the difference is so distinct. The last student says, I found the community to be the most impactful part of the workshops. The activities were amazing, but what was even more incredible were the people. Getting to meet, getting to know, and speak with people coming from such a wide variety of backgrounds, all gathering for a common purpose, was very powerful. So it's really great to see our students enjoying the workshops and this experience. And then here you'll see, I think this thing has a pointer. Okay. All right. Better stop clicking on it. Oh, it's because this is not. There you go. Zoom tricked me. Okay. It's great to see our students enjoy. And so here you'll see, like, we have students manipulating fire. We have students. So after we burn once at the Tending and Gathering Garden with Diana, and we come back another 2 times to clean up and then to replant native plants. We also have master basket weavers come out and we help them gather. And so we learn about what good materials is like. We also learn how to clean it for them, which is, I think, my favorite part, and I think it also helps them out a lot. And so they also give, you know, impromptu classes, and they're able to take material for future students. So, you know, they give basketry classes, and it's really important to have material for those classes. And so thankfully they're able to gather not just for themselves, but also for others. And so these are some pictures of where we burn. This is where we burn in Mariposa at the Jack Kirk Estate. And this is the Tending and Gathering Garden, which is a project that's a part of the Cache Creek Nature Preserve. It used to be a gravel pit mine. And we're restoring it. It looks very different now. And the idea was to create a place where basket weavers could come and get material. And so we're working a lot with the soil there, as you can imagine. The soil is a major issue. But we also, you know, the plants are doing well. And so I think it's kind of beautiful. So some important takeaways from this project is that I think academics have a really important role to play in collaborating with communities, but only if we approach it as learners. My second takeaway is just how important and necessary the training we give students about working with tribes is. Some of our students have gone on to work for state agencies, for tribes, and they always kind of turn back to this as one of the places where they really got to practice that before it was their responsibility of their job or before it was really critical. You know, they kind of get this learning environment to do this thing that's really complex. I kind of wish I had had that too. And then the third thing is about scale. I always get questions about scale. On the Jack Kirk Estate, it's about 5 acres that we usually burn per year. On the Tending and Gathering Garden, I would say 2 or 3. So very small scale. But I think what's important here is that collaborating and burning and learning together is impactful beyond the workshops. So workshop participants that come and burn these 5 acres, they go back to their tribes and they're like, well, we can do that. I just did it. And I think that empowerment that comes from being able to participate has really multiplied the amount of people that think they can. And I think that's one of the huge impacts of this workshop. The fourth is that it's important to have consistent learning spaces for new practitioners, intertribal knowledge exchange, and agency tribal knowledge exchange. All of that is very fruitful. So we have these workshops every year. People can depend on seeing each other every year at these workshops. And a lot of relationships build that maybe wouldn't have geographically, because people travel in from Oregon, they travel in from Los Angeles, so all over, and they're able to see each other, able to share about their own programs and what's working and what's not. It's been awesome to see some community impact, a high school internship program, practitioners at the Tending and Gathering Garden being tapped to lead a cultural humility workshop for CAL FIRE. A lot of Indigenous grad students getting to be involved in this effort. Also a fair amount of policy impact. So This project was highlighted in President Biden's executive order for guidance for federal departments and agencies on Indigenous knowledge. We were also able, with John, who I see back there, be a part of this report, prioritizing forest health investments, where we were able to take what we learned and what we knew from these workshops and kind of think about how it would best serve to think about how the state funds forest health. And that also became a peer-reviewed paper, which is in that QR code. I'll help put them up at the end. There's also a lot of research that has come out of this. There's research on collaborations and how this collaboration is working. There's ongoing research on the impact of place-based education for our students. A lot of the basket tree material at Mariposa is sourberry. And we have a PhD student who is now being asked to do this very big project on this basket tree material, which is awesome. I think it'll be his whole dissertation, but it was kind of this thing where he was just coming to the workshops and now people have questions about sourberry. And he's like, well, I guess I got the time and I got the knowledge. And then we were also, a lot of the master basket weavers that are out with us on the land are a part of the California Public Domain Allotee Association, which has led to a larger project, which I will zoom through because I want to have time for questions. But essentially, public domain allotments were created or established by the General Allotment Act, the Dawes Act of 1887. The goals were really to encourage private property ownership among Indigenous people, settlement, farming, and to just break up collective lands. This was really harmful because allotments divided and vastly reduced Indian land holdings. And allotments occurred without tribal consent and in violation of treaties in some cases. But after treaties were not ratified in California, these public domain allotments were one of the few ways that California Native people obtained and recognized land rights. So these are places where families have been going for a long time, where they have some level of ownership. And you know, right now they're an estimated amount like 16,000 acres of land like this throughout the state. There were once 336,409 acres, which through various cancellations and just forced sales and a lot of kind of shady stuff that happened, is now down to 16,366. And so all of this to say that these lands are still very important. And we have plans to work with this, with the master weavers that were part of California Public Domain Allotee Association, to really help people understand what the natural resource conditions are here, what the climate predictions are for how these lands will be impacted, and providing that data to community members, and also creating some resources on how both the legal side of things, you know, how to navigate the legal end of these landscapes, which can be quite complicated, and also, you know, how to then steward and what are some things to consider there. And so, sorry to zoom by that, but I guess I'll just end by saying thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you all. And I'll take your questions. These are the QR codes that I kind of sped through if you're like interested in seeing them more closely. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk. So with the scale questions, I know you get it a lot. I'm wondering, do you have thoughts on whether the scale is more related to like land ownership and like people being limited to like the allotments or like smaller scales? And if before that they were at a larger scale, like the cultural burning, or has it always been just kind of this thing of like smaller place-based that's like in a lot of different areas, and so kind of like multiplies over time. So I'm just kind of curious of like, how much has the policy and just like the breaking up of the land influenced the scale?
Yeah, so I think today, the scale of cultural burns is largely driven by those constraints, whether that be, capacity or, land jurisdiction. Just like you said, I do think that that's what drives the scale today. But I think if you're talking about scale pre-contact, I think that's a little harder to say. I do think that, if we're thinking about just where cultural burning is happening, it's happening everywhere, it's happening at huge scales. Some people burn for different things. So some burns would be smaller scale just because people are trying to tend to a specific patch of something. But that doesn't mean that their neighbors aren't doing the same thing and that their neighbors aren't doing this, and then it was like huge scale, right? So I don't know. But in terms of today, I do think it is driven by those limitations. And that's why I also don't like when people say that cultural burn is small scale burning, like very low and controlled. Because I think that's one, like the small scale is constrained. I also think that like there was different kinds of burns that were happening, and like I don't know, like I don't think that saying, like, if you notice in my cultural fire definition, I didn't even go into like they're at this scale and at this temperature and this is how controlled they are. It's like not, I don't know, like I think it just depends on the ecosystem. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah.
I was curious kind of like how you imagine the future looking, and kind of like what an ideal fire management and like cultural burning practices in California might look like if policy is able to adapt finally and like people have access to lands, and I don't know, like kind of what's your vision if things could get better, where would they go?
Yeah. I think when I go to the workshops, I feel like I'm in the future in some ways, or like that we're collectively imagining a future together, because it is like it's policy, it's also ecosystem. So like there's a lot of ways that we can't burn because it would be dangerous now that wouldn't have been dangerous in the past. But just going out to a burn and seeing like 1 to 2 year old babies, seeing, kids that are maybe like 7, like know more about fire than adults. Like they're just like out there, they know the plants, they know what's dangerous and what's not dangerous. Like there's just such a relationship to fire with the people there, and especially the indigenous people that have a connection to the land at the workshops, that feels so connective, and it feels like so supportive personally that thinking about the way I feel when I go to the mall, I feel like, oh, consumerism, like capitalism, and I'm like this lone person trying to make enough money to buy stuff, and going out there and feeling like, oh wow, like people care about my safety, people are looking out for me, people care about all the children that are there, people are loving being outside. It's a beautiful day and fire is happening and we're all learning and working with the fire. We're all aware that fire can get out of control, but we're not scared of it. Like we're aware, we're understanding, we're like, okay, maybe fire doesn't go over there, maybe it just stays here. But that kind of relationship and not feeling fear and not feeling the need to control is this really nourishing to me. I love it, and I think that's a future that that can happen. I think the beautiful thing is that it's already happening in some places. Yeah.
Thank you, Denise. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I feel like every time I learn about it, because of the thing, I learn a little bit more. And it's just super inspiring. I think one of the most kind of inspiring parts to hear about is about the people who graduate on through the program and how, you know, listening to some of the tribal elders who were wanting policy people to better understand this. They want agencies to better understand this. You hear that some of the students that you graduated are going into these positions. So I'm wondering if you're tracking where the students are going, because that could be really impactful and interesting. And B, where do you get funding for this? Because, you know, you're engaging with your tribal partners on a regular basis, year after year. Do you have consistent funding from the university, or how does that work?
Great question. No, we don't track the alumni, but we should. They do come back year after year. But yeah, we have like tribal monitors, we have nonprofits, and we're having like folks going to work with tribes. But yeah, we should like formally do that. In terms of funding, so we're actually, a lot of our funding comes from the USGS through the Climate Adaptation Science Center, the Southwest Center. So that's a chunk of money. Another chunk of money comes from the Yochi Dihi Endowed Chair that Beth Rose has. And with the USGS, I think it might be 2 grants. So it's grant funded, which is not, it's been stable for 6 years, but you know, it's not from the university. I think what it allows us to do, because you're right, we do interact a lot with community. We pay on our earners for classes, we pay on our earners for leading workshops, we pay for food, we pay for lodging, and we pay for travel. So it's actually quite a bit of money. I haven't like looked at the full budget in a while to tell you like what it was, but yeah, it's each of these workshops cost, well, the Mariposa workshop costs more than 10 grand. And that's, you know, just putting folks up in hotels and things, you know. And then, yeah, I mean, I think funding, and then we also fund graduate students to help with the class. Because as you can imagine, this is a huge effort. So it's not just like one instructor. So it's usually an instructor, which sometimes Beth Rose, and sometimes other folks. And then it's an instructor, someone that leads the research piece, and 1 or 2 grad students that help with the logistics. So another thing for students is that we do transportation, and we also do winter camping gear for the Mariposa workshop. So yeah, it's kind of a logistical bear. Yeah.
Oh, the Keepers of the Flame program sounds great. Thanks a
you.
lot for sharing about that. And congratulations on being used as an example in the executive office guidance.
Thank you.
You know, most, as you noted, most national parks and national forests, they're federal land today. They're on the indigenous land.
Yeah.
And so co-stewardship between U.S. federal government and Indian tribes is emerging as more important practice. Do you discuss that in your workshops? Have any ideas or practical experience from the attendees come out on indigenous co-stewardship of public lands and federal lands?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of informal discussion that happens. I think we hear a lot more about it from speakers in class about how they're navigating their specific situation. At the workshops, the focus really is on burning, so we don't talk about it as much, but it comes up a lot in other ways. So for example, at the Mariposa workshop, there's CAL FIRE shows up, and the relentless teasing this man puts up. Relentless. And I feel like that's one of the ways that indigenous people interact and kind of like, you know, but yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of ways that, a lot of teaching going on in terms of how CAL FIRE shows up in these spaces. So for example, there's a lot of teasing that happens around them wearing their full uniform. There's a lot of teasing around you burn everything too hot and everything dies under it. Like, come on, man, like what are you doing? And then there's like little bald spots on the land where they're like, oh, that's, that's Len. And there's, and he takes it good naturedly. I think he's used to it at this point. But I think there's a lot of kind of that communication that happens, and it's also kind of a way to assert, like, this is an indigenous space. Like, you all can call yourselves experts outside of this. Here, you're a learner. And like, I think that's an important dynamic that happens. And I think that there's a lot of networking for people that come out to these, so it might be really hard to get a meeting with the, CAL FIRE tribal liaison for the state, but he comes to every single one of these burns, so people might get to talk to him and kind of get, some FaceTime with him. So, that happens more informally at the workshops. That discussion, I think, is very foregrounded in the speakers that come. They're very, they talk a lot about the challenges they're running into and how they're navigating and how they're being creative about solutions. Is that?
Yeah, thanks. CAL FIRE, do you have anybody from the National Park Service or Forest Service, and talk with them?
National parks. I think we've had Irene Vasquez from Yosemite National Park, who leads an Indigenous stewards program there, come to the burns. She's native to that area, so it's very, I think that relationship is easy. I think the actual relationship between national parks and some of the tribal members we work with is a little strained. But I mean, I don't know, I think there's, still working through it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go check the chat, Denise.
Oh, yes, thank you.